Hello, it's Chris Jackman. Welcome back to the show. In today's episode, we're talking about a really important topic, a really important thing that I think we need to keep in mind when we're looking into our futures and planning for the future. And given the fact it's the first month of the year, I thought it was a good time to talk about this. It's called estate planning. Probably heard of it before. You might have heard a lawyer who says, "Hey, I do estate planning," but you may not have known what that really meant, because I think most folks, when they hear it, just think of doing a will, right? We always think of a will as kind of what you need, and representing a lot of fathers in particular and husbands in family law cases. Something I see a lot is that people don't have a will. And if they do, they probably don't realize that they actually need a lot more than just a will, right? They actually need to have more planning in place. They need to have more documents in place than just a will. Because as we're going to go over today, a will normally isn't just enough in terms of what you need to protect yourself, protect your children, protect your home, your bank accounts, your retirement accounts. I mean, all of these things that you have in your life that you care about, and you need to protect them because we don't know what the future is going to hold. And, in terms of what prompted this for me, in terms of something that I wanted to talk to you today about on this podcast, but also just in general, in terms of what I'm trying to do with our law firm and people we're trying to represent and people we're trying to help, is adding estate planning because 60% of Americans, I verified this, 60% of Americans have no plan in place. They don't have a will. They don't have what's called a trust in place. They don't have anything. And so, God forbid, if they were to pass away very suddenly, this could really put their children, all of their assets in a tough spot. There's the issue that we have, right, is just not effectively handling our plan, our future. And another thing I meant to mention as well is that what we often saw is folks that would have a life insurance policy, especially men who would, worked in a career or a corporate job for many, many years. They would go through a divorce and they wouldn't realize that they had failed to update their plan, their estate plan, or they'd failed to update their life insurance policy, right? And what they didn't realize is after going through that divorce, that they had not updated what's called the beneficiary, meaning the person, the person that you had listed to get your money in the event that you die, right? Because that's what life insurance essentially is it's paying someone in the event of your death. There's nothing in those documents that updates itself on its own or automatically. I mean, you have to do it. And, what we were seeing is men were going through divorces, hiring us. They forgot about this life insurance policy completely. And they go through the divorce. And then, if we hadn't reminded them to update that policy, everything would have gone, to their ex-wife. Again, these policies don't update themselves. So, unless you update it with your current wife, if you get remarried, or your children, the money from these life insurance policies will go to your ex-wife or your ex-girlfriend or whoever you list, and that's just a fact. And that's what motivated me too. So that was number one, in terms of my motivating factor. And like I said, just seeing the numbers of 60-something% of Americans not having any kind of plan in place and knowing the consequences of just not having a plan, because what people don't realize is that you actually do have a plan. And this is what I mean by that, is that if you don't have a plan in place, the state that you die in is going to have a plan for you. Right? Because as you can imagine, if there was no plan whatsoever, and when people passed away, it would be chaos, right? So you got to have that. You got to have the plan in place, because if you don't, the state that you're in will have it, and that may not be what you want done. The state's plan may not be what you want to have happen to you, right? To your assets, to your children. So. That's the gist of today's podcast, is getting you thinking about that, right? And we're going to spend a lot of time in future shows going in really deep in the nuts and bolts of what it means to have an estate plan and the different things you should have. Because it's just one of those things where it's complicated, and I think that's what probably turns a lot of people off to doing the estate plan is they get daunted and intimidated by the way it sounds, and they think that it's something that only the super rich can afford to do, or they just think, I'll get to it eventually. And I want to tell you a couple quick stories today to kind of get you thinking about why you need them. And I've started doing these events, these conferences where I go around the country and I talk to folks at live events, and I kind of go over the nuts and bolts of estate planning and why you need an estate plan. And what I often see and what I often tell people is that if you're going to walk away from this event that I'm doing with one thing in mind, like if there's only one thing you take away from this, it's that you need to get a plan in place, obviously, but even more specific to that is you need to get a healthcare directive. And, just broadly speaking, when I talk about estate planning, I'm talking about things like a will, a trust, a power of attorney, a healthcare directive. Those are all the things that kind of go into the umbrella, if you will, of an estate plan. But I want to tell you a story about why you need a healthcare directive in particular, because it's a tragic story, and it's one that I always struggle to tell because it hits me in the gut, and I feel horrible talking about it because for some reason it hits close to home. And I don't know why, because I've never obviously been in this situation or know anybody who has, but it's something I think about, and it's the story of a woman named Terry Schiavo. And if you want to Google it, I think it's spelled Terri, and then Schiavo is Shiv like Victor O, Terry Schiavo. And she, young woman, like 26 years old at the time, living in Florida. And this is many years ago. I want to say this was in 1996. Living in Florida, and I don't know if doctors ever fully understood what happened to her. There was some speculation I read online that maybe she was taking a cocktail of weight loss drugs, and she was trying to rapidly lose weight, and these drugs just had a really adverse side effect. But I don't think it's ever really known what happened to her. But what happened to her is she collapsed in her apartment and essentially became a vegetable. Just literally, it was one of these things where like you're here today and gone tomorrow, but except she wasn't dead. She was physically, alive in the sense that she was with a respirator, able to breathe. But I mean, she was on an incubator. She was being fed, intravenously. She was gone mentally, and I think it was probably the result of a stroke. And so here she is, 26 years old, here one day, gone the next, and she's a vegetable living off of life support. And it became clear over some period of time, some months, that she most likely was never going to recover from this. And it was also one of those things that since she was so young, she could probably hang on and survive for quite a while, and I don't know if it would have been 5 years or 20 years, but it was clear that she was able to hang on for life with assistance from a respirator and that sort of thing. Problem is she didn't have a will, didn't have a healthcare directive, which we'll get into, didn't have any kind of plan explaining what she wanted to happen in the event something like this happened to her. And who can blame her, right? She's 26 years old. And didn't have any health issues before that. It was just a really, one of those 1 in a million kind of things that happens to people that she finds herself having this horrific, essentially a stroke, and it almost kills her. But it in a cruel way, it didn't, right? Because she's now just in this vegetative state. She's completely comatose. And her husband, after a period of time, decided that he did not want to see his wife live this way and just sort of suffer endlessly in this vegetative state. And he wanted to pull the plug, essentially. I mean, he wanted to, end her life in as kind of a way as he could. But her parents were very much against that. Her parents were convinced that at some point she was going to come out of this, sort of like you see in the movies when someone, surfaces from a coma after many, many years. And they were convinced that their daughter would have this happen to her. And so this legal battle broke out, between the parents and the husband, and the husband sued the hospital, and I believe he sued the parents as well. I had to double check that, but legal battle breaks out, and it winds its way up the courts. Like the Florida District Court, the most basic level of court, agrees to, they make a decision. The case gets appealed to the Florida Court of Appeals. That decision gets appealed. It goes to the Florida Supreme Court. That decision gets appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it took something like 6 years, to get to that level, right? And all the while, Terri Schiavo, 26 years old, is now 27. She's still in a hospital, still comatose. And as you can imagine, it'd be I think part of the reason why the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, decided to take the case is because they recognize that that a lot of other folks had an interest in the outcome of this case in terms of what could happen. As you can imagine, the health insurance company for Terri Schiavo probably was keen to get a decision because here's this this health insurance company paying out, I'm sure in today's dollars, 2025 dollars, millions and millions of dollars, and the state of Florida was probably very keen on getting a decision for this case too, because, if the health insurance company can't pay it anymore, well, who's the payer of last resort? It's the state government, right? So everybody had a really big interest. And then obviously it spoke to just fundamental issues like, what is the role of government in deciding whether people can live or die? So really weighty, difficult issues to decide. And ultimately, the Supreme Court sided and decided in favor of the husband. And they allowed for Terri Schiavo to be taken off of life support, and she ultimately died. And my understanding is after that, even more lawsuits and more legal battles broke out between the parents and the son, or the son-in-law, I should say, the husband of Terri Schiavo. And it went on for years. I mean, years and years of litigation and fighting and lawsuits back and forth. And I can't imagine how much money, these folks must have spent on lawyers fighting this for, I think, well over a decade, and obviously just the heartache, that you lose your daughter at 26 to this freak accident. The husband, I'm sure, felt the same way, that he lost his wife. And the thing that is pertinent and important for today's show is that all of this could have been avoided if she had a healthcare directive. So what is a healthcare directive? It's a document that directs someone's healthcare. So what does that mean? It just means that it's a document that essentially explains and instructs doctors and hospitals and family members of what the person would like to have happen in the event that they find themselves in a Terri Schiavo situation. What do you want done? Do you want to be kept on life support? Do you not? One of the common things I see is that a document or healthcare directive will say that, they want a panel of independent physicians, like 2 or 3 different doctors, to evaluate the person before deciding that, yes, in fact, they are unable, to come out of this vegetative state and to go ahead and take them off of life support. Or it could say, you do or you don't want to be kept alive in a state where you're being assisted by a machine, or you're being incubated, and that there's just constant care for you 24/7. One of the things that I think needs to be clear in this episode is the fact that, estate planning is really an individual specific thing. It's not one of these things where it's a one-size-fits-all approach. We certainly do that for our clients all the time to make sure that we're specifically tailoring plans for people, right? And we're not just having this catch-all general provision that should apply to everybody, because this is when it comes to the end of your life, it's a very personal decision that only you should be making. But I think it's absolutely necessary, and I think it's one of those things where the Terri Schiavo case really brings that home, and no fault to her. May she rest in peace, obviously. 26 years old, you never think that something like this could happen to you. But like I mentioned a moment ago, this all could have been avoided if she had simply spent What do you think it would take? 20 minutes, 30 minutes to sit down and put on a piece of paper? Obviously the help of a lawyer would probably make it go even faster to explain, what she wanted to have done in the event that she found herself in a situation like she ultimately did, which is on life support in a vegetative state with no clear sign as to, how long she was going to be in this vegetative state, right? So it's a gut wrenching story. You might have heard of similar stories out there like that, where people find themselves in comas or vegetative states for long periods of time. And, they're, like I said, most people don't have a plan as to what you want to happen in that situation. And that's one of the big things I hope that you can take away from today's episode is that it's a difficult thing to think about, and it's a difficult thing to write about, write down what you want to happen. But it's one of those things where you kind of got to do it. You gotta be able to put it down on paper and record it in a way that's done correctly, right? And that's really where the help of a lawyer comes into play, right? Because you want to make sure that depending on what state you're in, that the legal requirements are being met, in terms of what has to be done, to make sure that this document's legally valid. Because there are some requirements, right? You can't just write in the back of a napkin what you want done, and expect a judge in the event that it does go to a judge to uphold that, right? And to follow the guidelines of it. So it's important that, you meet with a lawyer and, make sure that you're doing things the right way and the form is legally compliant and all of that. So that's the first part of estate planning that I wanted to talk to you about in today's episode was the healthcare directive. I don't want to give you the impression that's the only document that you should be doing, because it's not. There's other documents that go into play with these documents, but it's certainly a key piece in the overall puzzle, if you will, of the kind of estate planning documents that I think you need to be thinking about and ultimately doing sooner rather than later. Just thinking aloud here of all the clients I have and the fathers that I've represented over the years, most of them, all of them in many cases have children under the age of 18, and thinking about what would happen, God forbid, if they found themselves in a Terry Schiavo situation where they, didn't have clear guidance as to what they wanted to have happen to them, the kind of situation that could put their children in. And in another episode, I'm going to talk at length about what happens in those situations where, you don't have a plan in place, your children are under the age of 18, and you've got to figure out, or the children have to figure out in many cases, if they don't have an immediate family member nearby, just how in the world that they're going to, how they're going to get by and where the children are going to live and with whom they're going to live. It's a difficult decision to make, and in many cases, it's a decision that you don't get to make, that the state that you're in has to make for you, right? If you don't have a plan in place. And that's the big thing that we're going to talk about in the next episode. But for today's purposes, I really wanted to hit home the healthcare directive. Just a quick summary. It's just simply a document that directs what you want done in the event that you have some kind of medical emergency or some kind of medical catastrophe, right? Second, it's short. You don't need to spend hours and hours drafting it. There's court state approved documents that you can draft, that goes into this, and that you just need to fill out. And obviously you need a copy, your lawyer needs a copy, people close to you probably need to have a copy nearby somewhere so this document can be found, right? Because you don't have a situation where you fill out this document and then you lose it and you have no idea where it is. So that's something to think about. I hope this has given you food for thought as to why you need to have this healthcare directive as a piece of the puzzle in your overall estate plan, as well as some other things that we touched on today, such as a life insurance policy that you're updating as events happen in your life. And I hope this has been a little bit insightful, at least. And I look forward to talking to you in more episodes about other pieces of the puzzle for the estate plan for you.